This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And I guess in Judy's time, it's good afternoon. I'm Becky Martinazzi. I'm the district consultant for libraries in Cambria, Indiana, and Somerset counties. We're excited to have this author talk with Judith Coopy tonight. And really excited because it was made possible by Judy and her publisher being able to donate some books to all of our district libraries in each of the counties. So library patrons got to take a book home with them and keep it. And this is actually going to be the first part of a two-part virtual series. We have next Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we're going to do a book club discussion meeting of the book. So hope you can make that one too. And just a few logistical notes, I guess, before Judy starts her presentation here. If you're not, I know some of you guys have probably done GoToMeeting before, but if you're not totally familiar with it, it looks like all of you, except Judy here, are on mute right now. So if you want to stay muted, that'll help with feedback, but then you can click on that microphone icon you should see on your screen and you can unmute yourself. We'll do any questions at the end of the presentation. And then you can also feel free to type in, there's a chat box that is on your computer, and all these functions should be on your phone too if you're on a smartphone. So you can go ahead, feel free to type in any comments as we go along here, and then also questions at the end. You can use that chat box for questions. And we're gonna be doing a PowerPoint here, so we'll have that as a visual. We were having some issues with the webcams earlier, but maybe once the PowerPoint is through, maybe we can try to turn on webcams if you'd like, and we can have some face-to-face interaction there. So I guess with that, I will turn it over to Judy.
Hello, I'm really delighted to have an opportunity to talk to you. I'm sorry you can't see me, but then maybe I'm not sorry you can't see me, so don't worry about that. I have a PowerPoint about the flood, and that's just a little background because I'm sure that from where you live, you know more about the flood probably than I do, but I'll talk to you a little bit about why I wrote this book, what I was going for. I'd been reading and studying about PTSD, and I thought about the fact that most of the time PTSD is referred to in connection with wars. And I thought to myself, no, there's a lot of things that can happen in people's lives that really traumatize them and that very difficult to get over. And that was my question. How do people get over this kind of a traumatic experience? And so I thought about different things I could write about, and I turned to the Johnstown flood. Now, here's what I knew about the Johnstown flood. I grew up in Altoona, okay? That might be an excuse, I don't know. But anyway, Johnstown flood, that's all I knew. I didn't know anything about it. So I thought, well, I'll just do a little research and find out what happened. And once I started doing research, it was just wow. I mean, I was caught up in it. I found it to be extremely fascinating, and I thought that my premise, how do people deal with these things? Can you ever get back to normal? Do people ever forget the things like this that have happened to them? So I did a lot of research, and I would recommend to you, if you're interested in knowing more, and if you haven't read David McCullough's book, The Johnstown Flood, he's a very readable historian, and you would like him. I'm sure you would. And so that became my mainstay, although I must have read 20 books about the Johnstown flood by the time my research was over. Anyway, now you know what I was going for. Maybe that makes a little more sense in what you've read. Let's just talk about the flood itself, and we'll go through our PowerPoint, and then we'll have some discussion. Um, the flood took place on May 31st, 1889. It was the day after Memorial Day. Johnstown had just celebrated and had a nice Memorial Day, observance. Okay, next slide. Okay, a little background on the dam itself. It was a reservoir built for the canal. The Pennsylvania Canal had been in operation since the 1830s, and they started this canal in 1838 because sometimes in the summer it got so dry that the canal water was too low, and so they had these reservoirs along the way to supply water when they needed it. It was this dam that they built was built actually by the Canal Commission, and it was 930 feet long at the top of the breast. So what they did was there were two mountains or two hills, and they just breached the gap between the two hills and made a dam. Okay, and that was on the South Fork Creek. And at the base of this dam, it was 270 feet thick. So you would think that that would have been very strong. And also at the base, there were 5 cast iron sluice pipes that controlled the level of water. So if it got too full, if the dam got too full or you had too much rain or whatever, you could open these sluice pipes and let the water out. And so that was the purpose in the beginning. And it was controlled from a wooden tower, and they could let the water, lower the water level anytime they wanted to. They finished the dam in June of 1852, which is really interesting because about then the canals came to not exactly an end, but they were no longer the most important means of transportation. The railroad had come in, and more freight was being being transported by rail, and the canals were becoming obsolete. So the dam gets finished, and it's not really very useful. Next slide. So in 1857, 5 years after it was finished, it was sold to the Pennsylvania Railroad along with all of the canal right-of-way. Everything that had anything to do with the canal was sold to the railroad. And mainly the railroad wanted to own it so that they could control the competition. In the summer of 1862, about 5 years after the railroad bought it, there were torrential rains, and the dam broke. And so originally, there were probably some questions about the way it was built. And that control tower that had been used to open and close the sluices, that burned, and so there was no other way now to open or close them. I don't know whether they were permanently closed or permanently open, but at that point, they couldn't change them. So it sat idle for about 13 years, just sitting there, not really under anybody's particular control. Until 1875, a congressman by the name of John Riley bought it, and he took out the sluice pipes and sold them for scrap. Now, that turns out to be one of the most important things that happened in the history of the canal, because once you can't control the level of water, you can't control the level of water, and that's a bad thing. When they were trying to rebuild the dam, they didn't employ any professional engineers. They just kind of did what they thought was a good idea, which is not a good way to build a dam. I understand that dams have some very unique engineering problems, and so that again was a problem that they just didn't address it. Then in 1879, they sold it to a guy by the name of Benjamin Ruff, and he in turn sold it to the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Next slide. Next slide, please. Have we lost our audio? Ah, there we go. Okay. We need to back up
Is that
one.
the one you want, Judy?
No, back up one, please. Okay. This is the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was established when they bought the dam as a.
Is it this one, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club?
Yes, this is the one. So it was bought and owned by a group of Pittsburgh millionaires, steelmen, including Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, Henry Phipps Jr., Philander Knox, Andrew Mellon, Robert Pitcairn, Daniel Morrell. Now, Daniel Morrell was from Johnstown. He was not one of the Pittsburgh millionaires, but he had a very good reason for joining this club. He wanted to keep an eye on these guys because there was concern right from the beginning about this dam and whether or not it was adequate to hold water if there were a disaster. Okay, so this place was very posh. It was owned and operated only by these millionaire families, and there were many more than I've named here. And then it was chartered in Allegheny County, not Cambria County, which is interesting because since it was in Cambria County, it should have been under Cambria County's control. But the speculation is that the people who owned it would rather have their legal operations in Allegheny County because they lived there and they had access to the courts and they had access to good attorneys, and so they just felt like that was a better place for them. Now, the people of Johnstown were aware that this dam could go, and there was a lot of talk about it. Sometimes they sent committees to inspect the dam and to make recommendations for its repairs. Sometimes they went to the actual representatives of the millionaires and they said, this is dangerous and you need to do something about it. And basically they were ignored. Whether the word didn't get to the right people or what the problem was, but nothing was done to shore it up. As a matter of fact, a few things were done to make it more vulnerable. So the people of Johnstown were concerned, had been concerned for years. But you know how it is when, you know, the story of the boy who cried wolf. Every time there would be a warning, the people get all worried about it, and then nothing would happen, and they'd say, oh, well, no, never mind. And so this had happened several times. So when the actual time came, there was a certain amount of skepticism and a certain amount of people not doing what they might have done to save themselves. Okay, let's look at the next slide, please. This place was very exclusive. It was only the millionaires from the city, and they had lots of money, and they brought their families, and they spent the summer. You know, it was cooler in the mountains than it was in the city, and people like to get away from the city for the summer. So this was just a great place. It was really a very, very nice place. Young people especially enjoyed it. Next slide. There was a clubhouse that was built first, and that clubhouse still stands. I think it's in St. Michael. I think you can see it from the highway when you drive past this area. So first of all, that was like a hotel, and people would come for a weekend and spend a little time. And there was a big dining room there, and it was a very nice facility. But the people were encouraged to build their own cottages, and so one by one, these cottages were built, and they were family summer homes, and they would bring the whole family from Pittsburgh, and they would spend the whole summer just really enjoying the water and enjoying the mountains and the coolness and so forth. One of those things, it was one of those places where the average person couldn't go. It was restricted, very much exclusive, and what the people, the citizens of Johnstown and the surrounding area knew about this place was mainly that it was snobbish, and that they wouldn't let people fish there and they wouldn't let people hunt there, and you know, the kind of thing you might expect. Okay, next one. One by one, as I said, they built the cabins and the cottages, and there was a boardwalk that went all the way. There's a clubhouse, and then you're going all around from one house to another on the boardwalk right along the shore. Very, very nice place. Next slide. And here we have the people who probably enjoyed this place the most, the teenagers, the young adults. Went there, and of course they spent a lot of time together having lots of fun. There were many activities. It was a good place to meet somebody that you might end up marrying. And again, very exclusive. It wasn't the town kids who came and spent time there unless they happened to work there, but it was the rich kids. Okay, next slide. There was sailing. They had many sailboats, and you could, if you went there, you could see a large number of sailboats on the lake at any given time. And next slide. There was rowing, like they had these sculls that they would row, practice rowing on, and sometimes they could also compete. They could go to various places where there were actual boat races, and this is where they practiced, and then they would go. And when I'm talking, can you see my arrow moving around on the slides?
I can't see anything.
Okay,
No.
that's good, because I'm moving this arrow around and I don't want to be confusing people. Okay,
Nope.
so next slide. This is a lovely picture, a painting actually, of the Conemaugh Valley by George Hetzel. It shows what a beautiful place it was, with the mountains all around. This is the Conemaugh River, and where Johnstown was located, the Stony Creek and the Conemaugh rivers came together. It's just an absolutely lovely place. But I don't know why anybody ever thought of building a town there, because it's obviously a very good place for floods. So the people of Johnstown were rather used to floods, not this kind. They were used to high water. When it rained too much, they could be wandering around in their hip boots, or wandering around in water up to their knees or their belts. But they, anyway, it sort of accidentally grew into a steel town. For many reasons, it was a convenient location for the steel industry, and so that's how it became a bigger town than it would have been otherwise. But when you look at what a beautiful place it was, or still is actually, you know, these mountains haven't gone away, and you can understand why people would want to be there. Next slide. Okay, this is Johnstown before the flood, just one angle. Nice little quiet, placid little town. River running through it, and another river feeding that, and you know, the railroad was there. It was just a nice place to live. Next slide. This is a park in downtown Johnstown. You can see the Cambria Iron Works offices in the background, the building with a lot of little windows in it. That's the offices of the Cambria Iron Works. But again, just a lovely town, placid, quiet. And when they celebrated the Memorial Day the day before, they had the parade, and they, you know, everybody was feeling particularly like part of the community. Okay, next slide. Now, here's the flood. The flood came as a result of torrential rains for about 5 or 6 days. And of course, it had been raining in Johnstown too, and the rivers had been rising. And again, there was always talk about the possibility of the dam giving way. But around 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 31st of May, the dam did give way, and it was because of the rains, but it was also because of some of the other things that had been done to the dam and not done to the dam. And there was a young engineer in charge of what was going on up at the fishing and hunting club. He was watching, but he couldn't do anything. There wasn't any way that he could lower the dam. He did what he could, tried to open the spillways, but he was just a young man, and he just watched it happen. Now, he tried very hard to get information down to the cities, down to the towns below the dam, but it was rainy. There were telegraph lines down. It wasn't easy to get the information out. And when the information did actually get to Johnstown, some of the people who received it didn't pass it on, and some of the people didn't believe it. And so around 4:30, there was a huge roar. Something was coming, and it sounded like a freight train, only it was a freight train in your ear, and it didn't stop. And it hit the city of Johnstown, came roaring down the Conemaugh, and hit the cliff on the side of the Stony Creek River. Like the Stony Creek is coming down at a 90-degree angle, and the water comes roaring down the Conemaugh, hits that wall of rock, and backwashes through the city of Johnstown and goes back down again. So what damage it didn't do on the first pass, it did on the second pass. And eventually then the railroad bridge, as I'm sure you know, stopped it. Now, it didn't stop the flood, it just stopped all the debris. And there was huge amounts of houses and buildings and even train cars and all kinds of things washed against the railroad bridge. Now, the railroad bridge held. The water kept on going because down below, south of the city, and on downstream from the city, there was a lot of damage. There was high water. It just wasn't as extreme as what hit Johnstown. Okay, next slide. This is the Cambria Library in the 1880s. It's now the site of the Johnstown Flood Museum. It was spared in the flood, and that's a good thing because it makes a great museum place, to commemorate these events. Next slide. This is what the downtown looked like after the flood. These are businesses, stores, offices, things like that. And the debris is just incredible. This is not as bad as it gets, but this is pretty awful. And many of these buildings in the downtown area survived the flood. And as a matter of fact, if you've been in Johnstown, you've probably seen the marks on some of these buildings, the high water marks from the 1889 flood and from the 1938 flood or 36. Anyway, this is what it looked like after the flood. Next one. This is the St. John's Roman Catholic Church. It caught fire and burned during the flood, and this is what was left when the flood was over, and they rebuilt. And it wasn't the only church that was destroyed. It was just one that was picturesque, I guess. Okay, next one. Some of the problems, the debris that was coming down the river, it was like a 20 to 30 foot wall of water and houses and barns and well, here we had rail cars, we have people, animals, incredible amounts just roaring down the river. And the way it did was it kind of rolled. It became such a compact kind of a pressed area that it actually seemed to roll. The water would roll under and all the debris would come over the top and it would keep on rolling and rolling. And of course, the noise was incredible, absolutely incredible. Okay, next slide. This is the way things looked. Again, houses piled on top of houses on top. And the trouble is, there were people down in there. And there are bodies on the roof of the one building right here. You can see wrapped up bodies. But the thing with Johnstown was they just bounced back. They picked themselves up. They cleaned up. They had a lot of help, a great deal of help from around the world. But they did pull themselves back up and remake Johnstown after this flood was over. But it was such a calamity, such an absolute tragedy. You can't really describe how it looked or how it felt. Next slide. There was a barbed wire company called the Gautier Wire Works, and their barbed wire tangled up with locomotives and track. And can you imagine trying to untangle this or trying to cut it apart and make it something, I mean, be able to move it? That was the kind of devastation that they faced. I mean, moving water can do some absolutely incredible things, and this is evidence of that. Next slide. You can see the railroad. I think you can see, yeah, you can see the railroad bridge very vaguely. It's almost like a line, a horizontal line across the middle of the picture. And from there, 30 acres of debris jammed against the bridge. It's amazing that that bridge held, but it did. Well built. You can see the Cambria iron mill, Cambria mills in the background, but all of this in the foreground is jammed devastation. And the problem was that, well, there were many problems, but the day of the flood, this whole mess caught fire because people had, you know, their stoves were picked up and there were ashes and there were fires in the buildings and things that were torn down and thrown together. And so it was tragic because there were people trapped in here, and the fire just, and nobody could get to them. They couldn't reach them. You know, it was also very dangerous because this was in fact floating. But once the water went down, it was just jammed in. Okay, next one. This is looking upstream from the railroad bridge to give you an idea of just how far, how extensive this huge field of debris was. Next slide. This is the town of South Fork after the flood. Looks like it was just about flattened. It was up, part of it was up on a hillside, so you can see that some of the buildings, some of the houses managed to you know, avoid the flood. But this is just typical. There were many towns along the way. It was, I think, about 14 miles from the dam to Johnstown, and it was meandering like the river was, you know, not a straight line at all. Next slide. This is what the dam looked like. I don't know how well you can see that, but boy, that is a great big U going across that valley. Both sides were the hills that were originally there, natural, and then and you're standing on the inside of the dam. That's why you see the trees out there, and it's just gone, and the water is way down low. Okay, next slide. This shows the path of the flood, but I apologize because it's not very big and it's hard to read the names of the towns. But here's where the dam is over on the right side, as you're looking at it. And then the dam breaks, and the South Fork Creek is the first route that it takes, and it goes and hits South Fork, and then it just meanders. It's very hard to see the course of the river, but it's just going, and every little town along the way, Mineral Point, Woodlawn, Wooddale, or I'm not sure what that was, Anyway, it finally gets to Johnstown, and coming up from the south is the Stony Creek, and so they combine, and the wall of water that comes down hits the cliff here on the side of the Stony Creek, and then washes back over Johnstown. So it's about as bad as it could have gotten, and the river meanders on down after the railroad bridge. It continues on down, and it continues to carry floodwaters. Next slide. So the results of this: 2,209 people were killed. That's how many they could count. That's how many they could find. There are probably still bodies buried under the mud and the muck. Civil suits against the club. When it happened, people did feel like the club should have some responsibility. Whether it was, of course, the one argument was it's an act of God. The other argument was, yeah, but you were negligent and didn't take care of things. So they tried civil suits, like to sue them for the death of somebody's mother, or the loss of property or something like that. But the civil suits failed. They were tried in Allegheny County. And of course, these guys had the money for the very best lawyers, so there wasn't much chance for any restitution. Club members just contributed minimal amounts. I mean, when you think about how much money they had, there was one train box or train carload of blankets sent, but not a real effort to make restitution or to take any responsibility at all. The club closed down, they left the area, and they refused to talk about it. That was the end of it. And the people of Johnstown had to get over it any way they could. Okay, next one. Okay, man-made causes, and there were several. The removal of those sluice pipes was one of the most important things, because you could no longer lower the level of the water in the dam anyway, except for it to go over the breast. Okay. They had not used any engineering expertise in rebuilding the dam. They just, some workers went and they threw rocks in it, and they, built it up as best they could without any real knowledge of engineering. Now, the breast of the dam was lowered, and that was because the people of the club, at first the breast of the dam was only 20 feet wide on top, and that meant one buggy or carriage or wagon could go across at a time. Well, people wanted to have two-way traffic, so they said, well, let's just lower the breast of the dam, make it wider so that you can have two-way traffic. Well, yeah, they did that. And when you lower the breast of the dam, that means it's gonna breach the dam. Less water. It's gonna take less water to breach the dam. And then, as they were doing that, as they were widening it and making two-lane traffic, there was a dip in the middle of the dam breast as a result of that, the widening, and they just left that there. They didn't try to shore it up or repair it. And then there's the infamous fish screens. The millionaires like their fish, and they like to go fishing, and they put fish screens in the spillways to keep the fish in the lake and keep them from going down into the creeks and being available to the people down below. So when the big high water came, the spillways were clogged. They got clogged with debris, and there was no way to get them out, and so the spillways were obstructed, and there you go. Now, where's the water going to go? Right over the top. Okay. Next slide. Okay, where the blame was passed around a lot, although the millionaires from Pittsburgh were very capable of, ignoring it and downplaying it and things like that. But the people of Johnstown, there were a lot of people in Johnstown who were very, very angry, and justifiably so, because they felt as though these people had neglected what they should have taken care of. So this man, John Fulton, 10 days after the flood, he makes this statement. I hold in my possession today, and I thank God that I do, my own report made years ago in which I told these people, who for purposes which I will not mention, desired to seclude themselves in the mountains, that their dam was dangerous. I told them that the dam would break sometime and cause just such a disaster as this. And he was one of many people who had gone to the club and tried to talk them into doing something or making the dam safer. Okay, next slide. George Swank was the editor of the Johnstown Tribune. He stayed in his office as the flood struck the city. He had a great deal to say about it after it was over, and he said, we think we know what struck us, and it was not the hand of Providence. Our misery is the work of men. So there was plenty of blame, at least implied, against the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club and the Pittsburgh Millionaires. Although, as you'll see, nothing really ever came of it. Next slide. Okay, what really happened is on the left side of your slide, and Waterproof, my book, and how I dealt with the realities is on the right. So what really happened is the club owners sent a carload of blankets and not much else. And the townspeople on the Waterproof side, the townspeople were aware that the club owners didn't care, that they were avoiding responsibility, that anything that you tried to do, like lawsuits and so forth, were going to get you nowhere. Now, there were various lawsuits directed at the club owners, attempts early on, but none of them, I mean, they all failed, and so people just gave it up. Now, there was a stable in Pittsburgh that would belong to one of the millionaires that was burned down sometime after the flood. And it was speculated that this was somebody trying to get even. But no one was arrested and nothing came of it. There were various attacks against the club owners. And when these things happened, people would say, yeah, that's Johnstown. People from Johnstown, they're angry and they're trying to get even. So there were, in my book, other acts of vandalism against the club owners. And it was basically, this is just a reflection of one group's way of dealing with a tragedy like this. You can get angry, you can be passive, you can be, you can try to use legal forms, you can do whatever. But there was no attempt to prosecute these people, even though people assumed, the people from Pittsburgh and the millionaires themselves assumed that if there was vandalism and so forth, it was coming from Johnstown. So in my book, a group of citizens were like Davy, Pam's father, Davy's father, and others were active in this vandalism and is trying to get even. It's just one way to interpret. You know, when you write historical fiction, you do a lot of research and you find lots of information that you can use, and you use some of it and you discard some of it. But I thought that it was pretty sure that there were people who were doing things to try to get even though there was not a great deal of publicity for that, and there was not a great deal of response to it. Okay, I think that might be the last slide. Let's try it. Yep, that's it. Okay, now, if you have any questions or comments, want to talk about the book or talk about the characters or why did you say this and why did you do that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
If anybody wants to unmute yourself, or there's the chat box there. If you want to type into the chat, you can read out questions.
Can't see.
Turn your webcam on now too, if you'd like.
Hi, this
Hi,
is Lori.
Connie Jellison. Uh-oh, there are two of us.
Uh-huh.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Connie.
Okay. Hi, Judith. We met in
Hi.
Pittsburgh a long time ago.
Oh, good.
Um,
Good.
I really enjoyed the book. I was wondering about a couple of things. First of all, the Oklahoma houses really remind me of the FEMA houses from Katrina and
Yeah.
that situation. Were you making that parallel?
No, the Oklahoma houses were the real thing. That's exactly what they did, and brought them in. And I don't think they ever had such a tragedy before that they had to do this. And so they got them wherever they could and brought them in as quickly as they could. But there's still a couple of them sitting around the city of Johnstown, and actually the one outside the museum. If you go to the museum, you can tour one.
Oh,
And
neat.
it would be like a FEMA house. It would be like a trailer or like a manufactured kind of a.
I took a saw. Did you want your face on there?
I'm sorry,
Hey,
I didn't catch.
Judith,
Yes.
this is Phyllis Coopy Crane in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Phyllis, I saw your name and I thought it can't be the same.
It is.
That's
I
delightful.
thoroughly enjoyed the slides. Have not read the book, but am anxious to get a copy and read the book. Our daughter lived in Johnstown for several years, so we saw some of the things about the flood. But we were excited to see that you were going to be doing this, and I thoroughly enjoyed your slides.
Thank you. I'll send you a book.
Oh, thank you.
Judith, I was also, this is Connie again.
Uh-huh.
I was also wondering about women in the book and how independent they were. I just was really struck by how each woman is shown as someone who really makes her own way. She
Mhm.
makes like oh, names are escaping me right now, but her friend who, was a little bit wild and
Laura.
but yeah, Laura, yeah, she was great. I loved her that, she was the way she was, and then Pam and her working and making a living and earning her way for her and her mom, and when her dad had left, I just was that on purpose? Because I was really impressed with the strong women, and especially how one tragedy can take a family and destroy them because they didn't have a breadwinner, this, Pam's family, because the dad left, whereas these
Yeah.
other families were able to rebuild their houses and do all those things because dad went back to work.
Yes.
I was really impressed with that.
Well, that's intentional. I like strong women too, and when I'm creating a heroine for a book, she better be strong. And when you look at the circumstances here and how these people went through this, you make choices. You can decide to fold up and go home to mama, or you can stand on your own 2 feet or figure out a way to make a living. And Pam, I don't think Pam had a choice really. She wasn't going to abandon her mother, and her father was gone, so she had to figure out a way to bring in some money. There were all kinds of charitable institutions that were there and offering food and offering clothing and things like that. But that only lasts for so long, and eventually you have to have figured out how you're going to survive. And I thought Pam had a pretty good idea going to work for the newspaper.
I love the line where she said about the lady who ran the relief. She liked you to appreciate her. She really, she wanted you to be happy that she was there. You had to kind of fawn over her, and that's true. And I also wanted to tell you, I work at a state hospital library now, and so they're all concentrating, of course, on mental health, and we all really felt you handled the different PTSD versions very well, that you handled the different ways that each person related to the tragedy and how they functioned. We thought that was very well done. So You had,
Well, there was a suicide. You know, you would expect that to
yeah,
happen sometimes. And then
yep,
there were people who just left. The fact that Davy came back was necessary to the story, but there were people who just left. And I often think about people who go through something like that, and I think, I wonder if anybody just disappeared and started a new life and a new identity. It'd be a good opportunity to do that if you wanted to.
absolutely. I loved the book. I used it as a book club. I gave it to my friend and she read it. So I'm very picky. I told you this before about independent authors, and I really appreciate your writing. So thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Come on, you guys. You got to have some other questions or some concerns or thoughts about that.
Hi, Judith. This is Lori.
Hi, Lori.
Maybe I missed this in the book, but did Pam's mother ever come out of her catatonic state?
Yeah, she did toward the end of the book. I think she went to the church and started to play the piano, and that brought her back to some extent. You know, I
Do you think
didn't.
she ever fully came back?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of left you hanging there. I didn't think about what was. I had her recover to a certain extent, but I didn't elaborate on how much. And I don't know, because I have never had any experience with that kind of catatonia. But it definitely is. It's what they call hysteria, where you know, you're so traumatized that you simply can't function anymore. I probably could have. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, my other question was, Laura, like, whatever happened with her? Like, did I miss how she died, or did she?
No, I didn't talk about how she died. I just talked about how she got married, and she was, Pam was kind of a little put off by the fact that she had such a nice house. They moved up to Westmont, and when Pam went up there to visit, it was kind of a little tense, you know. Laura was
Right.
Yeah, she was selfish person, but somehow or other you didn't not like her, you know. You could kind of accept the fact that she would do what she wanted or what she thought was best for herself. But I didn't elaborate on her later life, just the fact that there was tension between them, and apparently they stayed friends, because when the young man comes to interview Pam, it's her grandson, and of course Pam is very interested in Laura and Laura's grandson and so forth.
And Pam's son, he died in the war?
One did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the second one's survived. Any other questions? Yeah.
I just want to say that that's the first time I've ever heard of an Oklahoma house. And on Facebook, it's called Johnstown Vintage Memories. And somebody's been posting on there about different things in Johnstown. And he did this whole article on an Oklahoma house and showed the picture of the one downtown. So that was pretty neat.
I was delighted to see that, because I read about them, but it's one thing to read about something and entirely something else to go and see it and think about people living in it.
Right.
And, you know, I just thought I was delighted that they had it at the museum, and it was certainly worth looking at, especially, like, you know, when you can relate it to something that's going on now, like FEMA houses, you know. It's the same kind of circumstances.
I really enjoyed the book, though. So thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, this is Larissa. I have a question. You were talking about strong women in the book. Did Clara Barton have any influence on your characters because she was such a strong woman, came to town and helped with the Red Cross?
She did. She came to town and she established a hospital and all kinds of community action to help people in any way that she could. Actually, no, she didn't influence me. That's just the kind of characters I create. Strong women. I mean, I don't know. What would you write about a weak woman? I guess you'd feel sort of sorry for her. Otherwise, I think it's more interesting to read about and to follow the character of strong people.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Becky. I was just going to say, I really enjoyed the book as well. This was my first time reading it, and I'd read Redfield Farm before, and so I really enjoyed that one too. So I really like the historical fiction genre, and you can tell all the research that went into to the books that you do. So I was just wondering, as a librarian, I'm always curious about the research end of things. Did you go to the Flood Museum and look through archives or newspapers? Or did you do interviews with people? Just did you have a process for doing all of that?
Yes. First of all, yes, I went to both museums and I used newspaper archives. Old newspapers are really interesting. But one of the things I found most interesting was books that were written immediately after the flood, where they were memoirs of people, of what these people did and how the actual flood occurred for them. So everybody has a different story, and these first person stories are priceless because they talk about people's feelings and what they were doing. They're trying to hold on to whatever they could hold on to, and they're being crashed into various buildings and other things. And there's a story I'm sure some of you have heard about a little girl who got separated from her family. She was like 6 or 7, and she somehow ended up on a roof, and they went past a house or a structure that was intact and that was still a safe place. And so there were men in that looking out the windows of this place, and they yelled to a man who was on the roof with this little girl. He said, "Throw her to us." And so this man picks up this little girl and he gives her a heave, and she makes it. And they credit him for years afterwards with saving her life, which is probably true because the rooftop that she was riding on was probably easily smashed up. But the fact that this guy, this is probably a mill worker, strong enough to pick up a child and give her a heave and throw her into the arms of someone else. That's the kind of miracles that happen in events like this. And when you're doing research, you always have far more than you can use, and you don't always work everything into the book that you're writing. But it's still, I think, just because you do so much research, you know more than you need, and that makes it easier for you to stay true to the events, stay true to the time and the place and how the people would have felt. Anyway, I read a lot of old books as well as new books, recent books. But I think the best one, if you just want to know about the flood, it's David McCullough's book.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear about all the memoirs and first-hand accounts.
Yeah.
Out there.
Mm-hmm. And the thing with Jordy being found a long time later, that was true too. Those kinds of things happened. They were finding bodies 1, 2, 3 years later in the muck down. They excavate for something and they find a body. That kind of thing happened a lot. So it wasn't a tall tale that Geordie could be found that way. What did you think of Mrs. I can't even remember her name. The lady that was the mother of oh well, Judy, you haven't looked at it lately. Can't remember the name.
Mrs. Plummer?
Yeah, Mrs. Plummer. I thought Mrs. Plummer was an interesting character because she, like somebody mentioned a few minutes ago, that she liked to be appreciated, she liked to be thanked, or liked to know that you realized how important she was. But the fact that she, was part of the case against Marta's boyfriend, Esteban, right? Esteban? Is that the right name? You guys remember what the guy's name was that was Marta's
Yeah,
boyfriend?
it was Esteban, yeah.
No, Esteban. Okay, I just thought that the fact that she eventually turned really kind of rescued her character. She would have been pretty much a negative person if she hadn't admitted that she was lying. There's one other thing that I did in this book that I think fit. My husband is half Hungarian. His mother's parents came over from Hungary, and they were coal miners in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area. And so I've heard a lot about Hungary and about Hungarian people and about the ways that they survived when they came to America, And so I enjoyed writing about Marta and Esteban and the trials they went through, because that was one of the things that actually happened. There were people spreading rumors about the Hunkies and saying that the Hunkies were robbing corpses and that the Hunkies were doing this and that. And there was a lot of sensationalism, news reporting that was done in the wake of the flood. And so people like that, they suffered too from the attitudes that there were about them. And 2 generations later, you wouldn't know what a hunky was, So that's just part of our heritage, that we have such a long history of people coming, immigrants coming, and starting out at the bottom of the ladder, and being looked down upon, and then gradually they, next generation is a little better off, and next generation is just fine. Anyway, I enjoyed that, writing about that, because it had some personal meaning for me.
It's Larissa again. I had just had another question. When you mentioned about the story about the girl being thrown into the window, did you use Dr. Beale's account a lot for your characters or for any of your stories?
Dr. Beale?
Yeah, he was he wrote a book about his accounts.
Yeah, I'm sure I read it.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the stories that was in his book. I was just wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, that story was in more than one place that I read, and one of them I think was actually written by the girl when she was an older woman.
Mm-hmm.
About that experience for her. Actually, I didn't use any specific people that I read about in my research. I used incidents, just like the treatment of the Hungarian immigrants. I used those kinds of incidents, but I worked them into my own characters.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry I can't see you guys. It would be nice if I could.
We're sorry too. Unfortunately, GoToMeeting isn't cooperating with us today.
Well, that's all right. And I want to tell the rest of you people what a great person Becky is, because she put up with a lot of technological ignorance getting me set up. But I could blame the COVID virus for the whole problem. The reason is that my husband and I are staying in our cabin. We we have this cabin up in the woods. It's cooler up here than it is down in the valley, and so and there's nobody around. So we've decided we're just going to stay here until the danger of the COVID passes, and that means that the technology is a little bit rough and up here in the mountains, but we managed to get through it. Managed to get it done anyway.
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties, but it all worked out.
Well, unless you have any more questions, I thank you for coming, and I thank you for reading the book. And if there's anything else I can do, feel free to write to me or email me or whatever. I always enjoy hearing from people that have read my books. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you, for the donation of the books to all of our local libraries. I know, some people weren't able to come on the call tonight, but I know a lot of folks are reading and enjoying the book. So just thanks again for that, and thanks for just volunteering your time to be on the call with us.
Well, certainly, I appreciate the opportunity.
Judith, thank you. It was very enjoyable. This is Phyllis in Raleigh. Tell
Okay,
Lewis
Phyllis.
and I have fond memories of Aunt Rose and the meals she cooked from Hungary.
Oh, she was a Hungarian cook. She really was.
Mother always said Rose the hunky. That's how she just referred to her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't uncommon. There were lots of attitudes about immigrants and people who were different. But they've managed to. Those people certainly have managed to adjust and adapt. So thank you very much, all of you. I appreciate this. And again, if you want to talk to me or send any questions or any comments or anything else, feel free. My email, if you want to write it down, is jrcoopy @gmail.com.
All right. Well, thanks. I'll end our recording here. And just a reminder, we're going to be doing a book club meeting next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for any of the library folks that want to hop on and talk more about the book. Have a good day and good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.